New York remembers loyalty like a ghost remembers its name. Even when the living forget, IT remembers, because loyalty was once the backbone of the city's underground, especially in the era of two men whose bond rewrote the rules of power. Vincenzo Armand Luchesine Cassian Vale Grande, names spoken with a kind of reverence reserved for legends or curses. To the world. They were king and second dash and dash command. To their enemies. They were thunder and lightning. But before any of that, before the empire, before the blood, they were brothers, not by blood. By life. By everything that mattered. Their story began in the South Bronx, long before wealth wrapped around them like armor. Vincenzo was 16 when he saved Cassian's life. It happened in a back alley behind a convenience store owned by a man who charged neighborhood kids protection money they didn't have. When Cassian refused to pay, two older boys cornered him with broken bottles. He fought, but he was smaller then, lean, hungry, fierce but outnumbered. Vincenzo saw the fight from across the street. He didn't hesitate, didn't think, didn't ask who was right or wrong. He charged into the alley like a storm. By the end, the older boys were on the ground, groaning, bleeding, swearing revenge they were too afraid to act on once they realized whose fists had taught them a lesson. Cassian sat against the wall, panting, blinking at this stranger who defended him like a brother. Vincenzo didn't offer a hand. He just said, "You shouldn't fight alone." And Cassian replied, "Then don't leave." From that night onward, they were inseparable. They hustled together, fought together, protected each other, rose through the ranks of the underground like twin meteors heading for the same sky. When Vincenzo ascended to leadership at 28, he didn't choose Cassian as his second-in-command because it was expected. He chose him because it was destiny. "Whatever I build," Vincenzo said during the coronation dinner, "you build with me." Cassian lifted a glass and answered, "Whatever tries to destroy us, we destroy together." And for years they did. Their bond was carved from survival, sealed in loyalty, and strengthened through battles that would have broken lesser To the city. They were unshakable. To their families. They were unbreakable. To each other. They were irreplaceable. Until the night everything changed. It did not begin with anger, not with betrayal, not with ambition. It began with a rumor, the quiet one, a whisper carried through the alleys of Chinatown, then echoed in the cigar lounges of Midtown, then crept into the circles where power was currency. The rumor was simple. Vincenzo is expanding. The empire will be his alone. Cassian heard it first. He laughed it off, at least on the outside. But inside, something small twisted, because expansion was always a shared dream, a world they built together. But the rumor insisted Vincenzo was doing it without him. ATA warehouse meeting 2 weeks later, the seed deepened its roots. Vincenzo stood before a group of allies, outlining his vision for extending their influence into new territories. Harlem, the West Side, parts of Brooklyn. Cassian listened, until one man asked, "And who will oversee the operations?" Every eye turned to Cassian, because naturally, who else? But Vincenzo answered, "I will handle it personally." Cassian didn't react, but a quiet, invisible crack formed between them, a crack so small no one could see it. Not even Vincenzo, but Cassian felt it. He told himself it was nothing. Just strategy, just business. He was wrong, because cracks don't disappear. They spread. It happened the night they welcomed foreign investors, dangerous men from old families in Sicily. The meeting took place in a marble hall in Upper Manhattan. The air was heavy with cigar smoke and secrets. Vincenzo was commanding, charismatic, magnetic, everything a leader should be. Cassian stood beside him, silent but sharp. Halfway through the meeting, one of the Sicilian delegates asked bluntly, "Which of you is the true power of New York?" Every man in the room expected both Vincenzo and Cassian to answer, as they always had, "We rule together." But Vincenzo spoke first. "I am." Just that 2 words, simple, clean, deadly. Cassian didn't flinch, not outwardly, but something inside him broke. Not a crack this time, a fracture that filled with envy, resentment, and a painful truth he didn't want to face. Vincenzo had outgrown him. The world saw Vincenzo as the lion, and Cassian as the shadow. Once, Cassian accepted that. Once, he believed shadows had their own power, but not anymore. Not after the rumor, not after being sidelined, not after being dismissed. That night, Cassian walked out of the hall alone, stood in the cold New York air, and whispered a sentence he never imagined he could think, let alone say. If I cannot stand beside him, I will stand above him. From that moment on, the enmity was real, certain, irreversible, and like all great tragedies, no one saw it coming. Not the city, not the families, not Vincenzo Lucchese, and definitely not the two children whose hearts were slowly intertwining, Aurelio Lucchese, Serafina Vale Grande, children raised under a friendship already dying, children falling in love under a sky preparing for war. Aurelio Lucchese and Serafina Vale Grande were born 3 months apart, Aurelio in winter, beneath a sky the color of steel, Serafina in spring, under a sunrise so soft it felt like a blessing. From the very beginning, they were woven into each other's lives. Their first steps were taken on the same marble floor of the Lucchese penthouse. Their first words were spoken in the same nursery. Their first memories contained each other's faces, while Vincenzo and Cassian built an empire brick by dangerous brick. Their children built something infinitely gentler, a world of secret hideouts in the gardens, tiny conspiracies whispered behind closed doors, and loyalty untouched by the poison of power. Growing up in the Mafia wasn't normal, but Aurelio and Serafina made their own kind of normal. Aurelio was bold, curious, protective from the moment he could walk. Serafina was sharp, thoughtful, quietly brave, with a stare that understood too much for her age. They balanced each other, challenged each other, completed each other. Even the bodyguards secretly called them the twin flames, because where one went, the other followed. But as they grew older, their bond changed, softened, deepened, shifted into something neither of them understood, but both of them felt. It was in the way Aurelio's eyes lingered on her longer than before. It was in the way Serafina smiled differently when it was him. It was in the way they held hands during thunderstorms because they didn't want to admit how much they needed the other. Their fathers noticed none of it, not because they weren't paying attention, but because their own bond was slowly dying. Envy was spreading inside Cassian like a disease, guilt and confusion were grazing Vincenzo's heart like a blade he couldn't see, and the children were caught in the middle of a war that hadn't yet started, but was already changing the air around them. The first time Aurelio sensed something was wrong, he was 15. He had just come home from a boxing lesson when he heard raised voices downstairs, his father and Cassian. That alone was strange. Those two men argued about strategies, numbers, risk, but never with emotion. This time was different. Vincenzo's voice was sharp. You moved without telling me. Cassian's answer was sharper. You don't tell me anything anymore. Aurelio froze on the staircase. He wasn't supposed to hear this. He knew the rules. Family business stayed behind closed doors, but he couldn't walk away. Vincenzo. Cassian, we've always discussed every expansion, every alliance. Cassian. You discuss with them. With outsiders. With the council. With the Sicilians. A paused, a bitter breath. Not with me. Aurelio's stomach tightened. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't logistics. This was hurt. Hurt between men who never showed pain. Vincenzo's voice softened, but that softness had an edge. I never shut you out. Cassian laughed quietly, a cold sound Aurelio had never heard from him before. Yes, you did. You just didn't notice. When footsteps approached, Aurelio slipped away, but the echo of Cassian's words followed him for weeks. Serafina noticed it too. She noticed everything. Whenever she asked Aurelio what troubled him, he said nothing. But she saw the fear in his eyes. The fear of losing something he once believed was unshakable. The final confirmation came 2 years later. Aurelio was 17, Serafina, 16 to be why then. Their feelings had become something undeniable, but still silent, still hidden, still sacred. One night, after a late dinner between the families, they snuck away to their favorite rooftop garden overlooking the city. The place where they shared dreams, jokes, secrets, and wordless affection. But that night, the peace shattered. Vincenzo and Cassian were arguing again, But this time, it wasn't anger. It was pure, blistering rage. And this time, it wasn't behind closed doors. Their shouts echoed through the halls. Bodies moved. Guards whispered. Tension spread like wildfire. Aurelio and Serafina held their breath as they listened. Vincenzo, I trusted you with my life. Cassian, and I watched you take the life we built and make it yours alone. Vincenzo, you're my brother. Cassian, brothers don't cast shadows, so deep the other man disappears. Then Cassian said something that made Aurelio go cold. You've become the king, and you don't need a second. You need a servant. Vincenzo's reply shook the walls. If that's truly what you believe, then you were never with me. Silence, a long, painful silence. Then Cassian walked out. The door slammed like a gunshot, and at that moment Aurelio and Serafina knew their father's bond had died. The enmity was no longer growing. It was alive, breathing, real, and their love would soon become the most dangerous secret in New York. The night Cassian walked out of the Lucchese mansion, something fundamental shifted in the city's underworld. Not loudly, not violently, but deeply, like a tectonic plate sliding beneath the earth. Quiet yet catastrophic. Every man loyal to the Lucchese Empire felt it. Every enemy hoping for weakness smelled it. Every ally pretending neutrality whispered about it. But Aurelio and Serafina felt it differently. Not as strategists, not as heirs, as two hearts suddenly standing in the middle of a divide neither of them created. Before that night, their connection had been gentle, beautiful, innocent in its own impossible way. After that night, it became something urgent, something necessary, something almost desperate. They both knew if their fathers were becoming enemies, then they had become each other's forbidden refuge. Aurelio realized it first. It hit him the morning after the argument, while he sat by the kitchen window, staring into his untouched cup of coffee. The sky outside was fogged, the city drowning in weak sunlight. But all he could think about was Serafina's face the previous night, her worry, her trembling breath, the way she whispered his name like it carried all her fear, and he understood. He could live without the Empire, he could live without power, but he couldn't live without her. Serafina came to the same realization in her father's penthouse, standing on the balcony overlooking the East River. Cassian was inside, pacing, angrier and more volatile than she had ever seen him. He was losing something he couldn't admit. He was breaking in ways words couldn't repair, and Serafina's heart broke too, not for his pride, but for the war she knew he was building inside himself. Aurelio was the only piece she had left that day, without speaking, without planning, without permission from fate. Aurelio and Serafina found each other again, behind locked doors, hands trembling, breaths uneven, and words. At first, just the silence of two souls choosing each other in a world that would punish them for it. Then Aurelio whispered, "No matter what happens between them, you're still mine." Serafina's eyes glistened with a grief too deep for her age. "And you're still mine." That sentence sealed their fate. From that moment forward, they lived in two worlds. The world above ground, ruled by grudges, pride, power, and men who had forgotten how to forgive, and the world below the surface, where two young hearts clung to each other as everything around them cracked and burned. For years, the Lucchese, Vale Grande alliance had been the backbone of stability in New York's underground. But within weeks of the argument, cracks became visible. Meetings held together by the two families suddenly became tense. Guards started standing on opposite sides of rooms. Family dinners stopped entirely. Mutual businesses were postponed. Joint operations became divided, reevaluated, or canceled. The most alarming sign came from the streets. Loyalists, the men who swore allegiance to both leaders, began choosing sides. Some whispered, "Vincenzo is the true king." Others whispered, "Cassian is the future." These whispers traveled, multiplied, grew teeth, and Aurelio and Serafina felt those whispers like cold hands tightening around their throats, because they knew their father's enmity wasn't a private wound anymore. It was evolving into a public threat. Cassian had never been the emotional type. He was calculated, disciplined, controlled, but after that final argument, He changed. He became quiet to the point of being frightening. He spent hours alone in his study, staring at old photographs of him and Vincenzo when they were young, laughing, bleeding, planning the empire that was now unraveling. His advisors asked what was wrong. He answered with silence. His men asked if there would be reconciliation. He answered with more silence. But silence was dangerous. Because silence in a man like Cassian wasn't resignation. It was preparation. And Aurelio knew it. He saw it in Cassian's eyes each time he came to pick up Serafina. Cassian didn't forbid their visits. Yeah, he didn't ask questions yet. But his stare was heavy with suspicion. As if he sensed the truth. As if he feared losing something else to Vincenzo. As if the world inside him was breaking and rebuilding into something colder, something darker. While Cassian hardened, Vincenzo softened, but not in a way that made him weak. He became quiet too, but with a heaviness full of grief rather than anger. He replayed every argument in his mind, every decision, every mistake he might have made. He even tried sending a mediator, a trusted elder from the old families, but Cassian refused the invitation, and that refusal was the moment Vincenzo finally understood. Cassian wasn't wounded anymore. He was gone. A man doesn't refuse peace, Vincenzo murmured one night, staring at the city lights. Not unless he's preparing for war. That night, Aurelio found his father alone. Vincenzo didn't turn. Dad, he asked carefully. Vincenzo's voice was low, quiet, heartbreaking. How do you mourn someone who's still alive? Aurelio had no answer, because he was mourning too. Not only his father's lost brother, but the world he and Serafina were slowly losing to pride and vengeance. It happened 3 weeks later, a shipment coming into the Brooklyn docks. Routine, simple, predictable, was ambushed by a rival gang known as the Black Serpents. Weapons confiscated. 3 men killed. A message left behind. You're slipping, Lion. But something was wrong. The timing was too perfect, the ambush too precise, the serpents too bold. Someone had given them inside information, and when Vincenzo checked the intel logs, one name appeared again and again. A messenger known to work under Cassian Valegrand's payroll. Vincenzo froze. Every breath left his body. His heartbeat became a roar of disbelief, fury, and heartbreak. The betrayal wasn't proven. But it wasn't impossible anymore, and that was enough to turn enmity into certainty, enough to turn former brothers into future enemies, enough to make war inevitable. And Aurelio and Serafina, caught between 2 collapsing empires, had no idea that their love was about to become the spark that ignited the final explosion. Love is supposed to be a sanctuary, but in New York's underworld, love is a battleground. And for Aurelio Lucchese and Serafina Valegrande, their hearts were becoming both weapon and target. After the fractures of Part 1, the city changed. It didn't happen overnight, but like the slow turning of a tide before a storm, the streets grew quieter. Men carried guns with less hesitation. Meetings were shadowed with distrust. Old alliances questioned themselves. The news whispered about unexplained explosions, missing shipments, assassinations no one would claim. New York was preparing itself for a war that had not been declared, but had already begun. Aurelio and Serafina were no longer children in denial. Their bond had matured into something fierce, powerful, and forbidden. They met at night, mostly at the old rooftop garden, at a deserted jazz bar in Harlem that Aurelio rented out just for her. Inside a safe house only they knew about. They didn't speak about the growing tension between their fathers. They didn't speak about the whispers in the streets. They didn't speak about the fear in their chests. They spoke about each other, about escape, about hope, about a future they desperately wanted. Even though the world wouldn't allow it, Aurelio kissed her like she was the last peaceful thing in his life. Serafina held him like she was holding back fate itself. But even love has shadows. And one night, as Aurelio held Serafina close on the rooftop, she whispered something he knew was true but hated to hear. If our fathers go to war, we won't be innocent in it. Aurelio didn't answer, because innocence was already gone. Cassian Valegrande was a man who had once ruled through precision, logic, and loyalty. Now he ruled through silence. Dangerous silence. In the weeks following the ambush at the docks, Cassian met with a man no one expected. Marco Vescari, leader of the Black Serpents, archenemy of the Lucchese Empire. Their meeting took place in a dim, abandoned subway station beneath Midtown. The air tasted like rust and secrets. Marco smirked when he saw Cassian. Never thought I'd see you without the lion beside you. Cassian's eyes stayed cold. We no longer walk the same path. Marco chuckled. And which path do you walk now? Cassian pulled a folder from his coat. Blueprints, routes, shipments, schedules, all stamped with the Lucchese seal. Marco raised an eyebrow. Planning a little sabotage? Cassian's voice was flat. Planning to reclaim what should have been mine. Marco leaned closer. And Lucchese? Cassian looked away for the first time, not in shame, but in pain. Lucchese is the past. Marco grinned. And what do you want from the future? Cassian's answer was simple. Everything. Vincenzo Lucchese always trusted his instincts. IT was what kept him alive through decades of bloodshed. And now, those instincts were screaming. Something was wrong. Something was coming. Something had already begun. He noticed too many coincidences, too many shipments disrupted, too many informants disappearing, too many ambushes timed too perfectly. And every trail pointed back to Cassian Vale Grande. He didn't want to believe it. He tried not to, but belief and truth rarely walk the same road. One evening, Vincenzo found an envelope slipped under his office door. An O name, an O signature. Inside was a single photograph. Cassian meeting Marco Vescari. Vincenzo stared at the picture for a full minute, then another, then another. He felt something inside him break, quietly, painfully, without sound. He didn't rage. He didn't shout. He simply whispered, almost to himself. Why, Cassian? Those two words were heavier than bullets. Aurelio noticed his father's change. He saw the sleepless nights, the dark circles under his eyes, the phone calls made behind locked doors. Serafina noticed her father's transformation too. The sharper commands, the shorter temper, the paranoia growing like a shadow behind his eyes. Neither father knew their children were the only bridge left between them. But bridges are fragile. Especially during storms. One night, Aurelio and Serafina met in the safe house. A small loft above a closed-down bookstore in Brooklyn. Serafina was trembling. My father won't let me go anywhere alone, she whispered. He keeps asking where I go, who I see. Aurelio pulled her into his arms. Does he know? I don't think so, she breathed. But he suspects something. Aurelio swallowed hard. And your father? What about him? Serafina shook her head. He's not afraid anymore. He's preparing for something big. Aurelio gently lifted her chin. We'll protect each other, and no matter what happens. Her eyes softened. But what if what happens is bigger than us? Aurelio pressed his forehead against hers. Then we'll be bigger than it. It was a beautiful promise, a dangerous promise, a promise that would be tested by fire. The city's heartbeat quickened. Lights flickered. Sirens wailed in distant streets. Underneath the calm of Manhattan's towers and Brooklyn's old docks, a storm gathered momentum, and right in the eye of that storm were two lives, intertwined, endangered, and two men whose rivalry would bring it all crashing down. Aurelio and Serafina had grown accustomed to the stolen hours, the hidden messages, the subtle glances. They perfected silence. They mastered discretion, because what they felt for each other had become more than teenage infatuation. It had become conviction. And conviction in their world was dangerous. One evening, Aurelio arranged to meet Serafina in the dim light of an old jazz club in Harlem, the Blue Siren, tucked away behind a faded red awning, thick with history and cigarette smoke. He reserved a booth near the back, away from the stage, where the saxophone wailed like someone bearing sorrow for love. Serafina arrived in a simple black dress, elegant but understated. Her eyes flicked to him and everything else faded. He smiled, warm, knowing. He whispered, "You are worth every risk." She leaned in. "Then let's make the risks count." They talked of future plans, not escapist dreams, real ones, a small house in upstate New York away from this world of violence, a life together, children who would never know the sound of gunfire. Aurelio reached for her hand under the table and their fingers entwined. In that moment, Nothing else mattered, until his phone buzzed. He glanced down at an encrypted message. He frowned, excused himself, and stepped outside into the humid night. Serafina watched his silhouette through the glass. She saw the tension in his back, the way his shoulders stiffened. She knew something had changed. When he came back, his smile was forced, his eyes were darker. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. Cassian's meeting with Marco Vescari had lit a fuse. Things began moving faster than many expected. He orchestrated a series of precise hits. Shipments went missing. Alliances shifted. Murmurings of disloyalty rose. In the boardroom of the Lucchese Empire, Vincenzo sat with his most trusted lieutenants. Vincenzo's voice was calm, deceptively so. Find who tipped off the serpents, and find out how deep this goes. One lieutenant, an old friend of Cassian's, looked at Vincenzo with dread in his eyes. Boss, I'm afraid we're already too late. Vincenzo nodded, pain flickering behind his eyes. Then we'll move faster. Meanwhile, Cassian sat alone in his office. He picked up a photograph of him and Vincenzo when they were young, laughing beside a waterfront bar in Brooklyn. No suits, no titles, just two boys chasing something bigger than themselves. He stared at the photo and whispered, I sacrificed for you, I waited for you, and you never once saw what you owed me. He set the photo down, slid it into a drawer, and locked it. The war had begun. Vincenzo's investigation led him deeper than he anticipated. Early leads turned into dead ends. Old allies began avoiding him. Whispers of Vale Grande slicked across the city like OIL. In a cold late-night meeting in a warehouse in Queens, Vincenzo confronted one of his trusted men. The man's hands trembled as he placed a black USB drive on the metal table. Boss, this was in the archives. Vincenzo took it, inserted into a portable reader. Files opened, emails, schedules, Cassian's name. IT felt like betrayal made visible. He didn't shout. He didn't break things. Instead, he leaned forward and said softly, You were my brother. He closed the laptop. He left the warehouse, and the city waited. Serafina returned home late that night. Cassian's penthouse was quiet. Too quiet. As she stepped into the corridor, she overheard voices. Her father's voice, low and icy. Everything is in motion. By midnight, all will shift. She froze, heart thumping. She turned and walked past the open door, eyes down. In her bedroom. She found her phone buzzing with a message from Aurelio. Stay safe. I'll call you tomorrow. She typed back. I will. But she knew she wouldn't, because now, their secret wasn't just theirs. IT was connected to a war, and the war would not wait. War never begins with a gunshot. IT begins with fear, with suspicion, with silence so loud it shakes the foundations of an empire. And in New York, that silence finally shattered. The ambush that changed even if it happened on a Thursday night, cold and dry, the kind of night where everything feels sharp, alert, and dangerous. Aurelio was accompanying a cargo transport. Along the East River, one of Vincenzo's most important routes, routine, safe, predictable, until it wasn't. As their convoy passed under the Williamsburg Bridge, the world erupted. A grenade detonated behind the second truck. The sound tore through the night like metal being ripped apart by God himself. Aurelio dove behind a crate as bullets rained down from the shadows of the bridge above. Men screamed. Engines roared. The river echoed with gunfire. Aurelio lifted his head, eyes narrowed, and saw them, the black serpents, dozens of them. But this wasn't a random attack. This was precise, coordinated, planned with insider knowledge, and Aurelio felt his stomach drop because he knew someone gave them the route, someone close. His phone buzzed in the chaos, a message from an unknown number. Your father should have listened. Aurelio's blood ran cold. He fired back at the attackers, voice hoarse as he shouted commands to his men. Fall back. Cover the right flank. Two serpents rushed the truck beside him, and he shot them both without blinking. Adrenaline surged through his veins. But one thought cut through it all. Serafina. He had to get to her. He had to warn her. Because if the serpents were this bold, then Cassian must have already moved and Serafina would be caught in the middle. Cassian's opened it, and while Aurelio fought for his life at the East River, Cassian stood in a private, candlelit room beneath an abandoned church in Little Italy. Marco Vescari sat across from him, still smelling of smoke and gunpowder. Cassian didn't ask how the attack went. He didn't need to. Marco's grin said everything. Lucchese's boy survived, Marco said. A stubborn one, that kid. Cassian remained unreadable. Then leave him alive, he said quietly, for now. Marco raised a brow. Because he's your daughter's little friend? Cassian's jaw tightened, his voice went flat. They grew up together. Nothing more. Marco chuckled. Cassian didn't. Then Cassian placed a single sheet of paper on the table, the new map of territory lines, his signature, Marco's signature, and at the bottom, war level, active. Marco looked up, grinning like a man who tasted blood. So, it's official then. You're coming for the lion? Cassian's eyes hardened, cold steel, unforgiving, merciless. He left me no choice. Vincenzo's RL back at the Lucchese estate. Vincenzo sat at a long oak table surrounded by intel reports, photos, and surveillance files. He waited. His hands weren't shaking. His voice wasn't wavering. He had been preparing for this moment long before he wanted to admit. 10 minutes later, 2 guards rushed in with urgent faces. Boss, your son is safe. He managed to escape the ambush. Vincenzo exhaled shakily, but his voice held steady. Who led it? The guard hesitated. Black serpents, sir. But the timing, the route, they couldn't have known without. Vincenzo closed his eyes. Not in disbelief, not in confusion. Pained Cassian. It was the first time he said the name with hate. He whispered to himself, You've declared war on me and my son. And the lion within him awakened. Aurelio and Serafina, a love straining under TRH after the ambush. Aurelio didn't go home. He went to her. He climbed the fire escape of the Vale Grande penthouse, hands bloody, sweater torn, breath trembling. Serafina was already waiting on the balcony, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. Aurelio, what happened? You're bleeding. He grabbed her face gently, forehead pressed to hers. It's your father. Serafina's breath caught. Aurelio continued, voice breaking. He's starting something he can't control. She stepped back, shaking her head. No. Aurelio, he wouldn't. He's angry, yes. Hurt, yes. But betrayal?
No.
My father isn't. Aurelio cut her off softly. Serafina, he's the only one who could have given them my route. Her legs weakened. She gripped the railing. No, please. Aurelio wrapped his arms around her. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you this to protect you. Her voice was a whisper against his chest. What happens now? Aurelio swallowed hard. Now everything changes. Cassian discovers the essay inside the penthouse. Cassian stood in the shadows of the hall, watching through the glass door. He saw his daughter in Aurelio's arms. He saw their closeness, their fear, their love. His heart twisted, pain, betrayal, rage all crashing together like broken waves. A dangerous realization spread through him. Lucchese had not only stolen power, he had taken Cassian's daughter too. Cassian stepped back into the darkness, eyes burning. And he whispered the sentence that would ignite the bloodiest chapter of their war. So, even our children betray me. War didn't arrive in New York with warning shots. IT arrived like a shadow. Quiet, suffocating, patient. By the time the city felt its presence, it was too late to run, and at the center of it were 4 hearts. Vincenzo Lucchese, betrayed king. Cassian Vale Grande, rising usurper. Aurelio Lucchese, a son caught between duty and love. Serafina Vale Grande, a daughter forced to choose sides that would shatter her. This was the part of the story where the world finally broke. The first official blow came. 3 nights after the ambush, a car bomb exploded outside a restaurant in Little Italy, not aimed at Cassian, not aimed at his men, but at a warehouse run by his allies. Half the city heard it. The rest felt it. Cassian stood on a rooftop overlooking the smoke, hands clasped behind his back, jaw locked tight. It begins, Marco Vescari said beside him. Cassian didn't reply. He didn't blink. He was already calculating the counterblow. Serafina returned home late that night with a storm in her eyes and Aurelio's blood still on her fingers from patching him up. She barely stepped through the door before she felt the tension. Cassian waited in the living room, sitting perfectly still, elbows on his knees, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. "Where were you?"
His voice was calm.
Too calm, Serafina swallowed. "I went out." "With who?" Silence, the silence that broke her. Cassian stood slowly. "Do not lie to me." Her voice cracked. "I wasn't going to." "Then say it." She closed her eyes. "Aurelio." The room went still, not quiet, still, like the air itself became afraid to move. Cassian stepped toward her. "You saw him, even after what his father did." Serafina trembled. "Father, things aren't as simple as..." Cassian slammed his hand against the wall. "Love does not cancel loyalty." Serafina flinched but didn't step back. "And loyalty doesn't cancel truth, father." Cassian stared at her, hurt, betrayal, disbelief all crashing inside him. "You would choose a Lucchese over your own blood?" Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I choose Aurelio over war, over hate, over everything both of you are destroying." Cassian's voice turned cold enough to stop her heartbeat. "You will not see him again." Serafina whispered, "I'm not a soldier in your war." Cassian replied, "You are my daughter, and I'm losing everything else. I won't lose you." But he just didn't know it yet. 2 days later, Aurelio left a meeting in Soho and headed toward his car. Before he reached it, he felt it. That tightening of the air, that shift in instinct only those raised in the underworld understood. A shadow move, a glint of metal flashed. "Get down." One of his guards shouted. 3 gunshots exploded from across the street. Aurelio ducked behind a trash bin as bullets sparked off metal and concrete. His guard returned fire. Aurelio pulled out his own weapon and shot twice, hitting one attacker in the leg. The other fled. But the message was clear. Someone wasn't just targeting the Empire. They were targeting him. As Aurelio wiped blood from his temple, his phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Next time, we won't miss." Aurelio stared at the screen, and for the first time in months, fear pricked his spine. Not fear for himself, fear for Serafina, because if they were targeting him, she was no longer safe either. When Aurelio returned home beaten, bruised, and furious, Vincenzo met him at the gate. He said nothing, just looked at his son, looked at the injuries, looked at the trembling fists. Aurelio finally spoke. "Father, they tried to kill me." Vincenzo inhaled sharply, and something inside him snapped, not loudly, quietly, like a king who once believed in diplomacy and now no longer believes in anything but fire. He placed both hands on his son's shoulders and said, "I spared Cassian because of our past. I will not spare him again." Aurelio felt his stomach tighten. "Father," Vincenzo's voice sharpened, "they targeted my heir. Your life is now part of this war, and I will not sit back while he tries to destroy you." Aurelio swallowed, chest heavy. He knew his father's tone. This wasn't anger. It was finality. War was no longer coming. War was here. After Cassian's confrontation, Serafina spent 2 nights locked in her room, thinking, crying, fighting a battle inside her heart that no child should ever face. Then, before dawn on the 3rd day, she made a choice. She packed a small bag, opened her window, climbed down the fire escape barefoot and trembling. She ran through the dark streets of Manhattan until her lungs burned. And she went to the one place she knew she was safe, Aurelio's safe house. He woke at the sound of the lock turning and reached for his gun. But when the door swung open and he saw her, he dropped it. "Serafina." She threw herself into his arms, shaking. "I can't stay there anymore," she cried. "He's preparing for something terrible, and he said he'd keep me from you, Aurelio. I can't lose you, I can't." Aurelio held her tighter than he ever had. "You won't," he whispered fiercely. "You're here now with me, and I'll protect you from everything, even from this war." She pressed her face into his chest. "Even from my father?" Aurelio closed his eyes. "Even from your father?" Their love was no longer just a secret. It was a rebellion. By the end of that week, New York was divided. Half the underground aligned with Vincenzo, the Lion, half aligned with Cassian, the Phantom. Every club, where house, street corner, and dockyard now belonged to one side or the other. Neutrality died. Rumors spread like wildfire. Vincenzo wants blood. Cassian wants the throne. Their children are missing. Something big is about to explode. And they were right. Because the empire that once kept this city balanced was now cracking, and the cracks were widening, toward the war that would destroy them both, toward the battlefield where Aurelio and Serafina would stand in the middle, toward the night when one man would lose his legs, and the other his right hand. Part 3 ends where fear becomes certainty, where love becomes a shield, where war becomes inevitable. New York no longer whispered. IT roared. Sirens cut through the nights. Gunshots cracked under the bridges. Bars emptied at dusk because the streets after dark belonged to ghosts and soldiers. The Lucchese, Vale Grande alliance that once shaped the underworld, had become a grave everyone was afraid to fall into. And in the heart of that chaos were two young lovers hiding from two powerful men who no longer recognized mercy. Serafina's disappearance hit Cassian harder than any betrayal from Vincenzo ever could. He walked through her empty bedroom with a shaking breath, running a hand over her abandoned pillow, the open window, the faint imprint of her last steps. Then he found the note she left behind. "I choose love. Please don't look for me." Cassian's eyes darkened. Love, always love. First Vincenzo stole the empire. Now his son had stolen Cassian's only child. Cassian crushed the note in his fist. "Find her," he ordered his men. "Find both of them." Marco Vescari stepped forward. "You want them alive?" Cassian paused for a moment. His humanity flickered. The father who once braided his daughter's hair before school. The father who taught her to dance on his shoes when she was 5. Then the Mafia boss inside him sealed the door on that softness. Aurelio alive, Serafina unharmed. "And if they're together?" Marco asked. Cassian's jaw tightened. "Bring them home apart." Aurelio and Serafina stayed hidden in the safe house for 2 days. 2 days of whispered plans. 2 days of sleepless nights. 2 days of clinging to each other, because the world outside wanted to tear them apart. On the 3rd night, Aurelio looked out the window and saw a black SUV parked across the street. Tinted windows. Engine running. Not moving. He stepped back immediately. "They found us." Serafina's heart sank. "How?" Aurelio grabbed her hands. "We have to go.
Now."
They left through the back alley, shadows moving with desperation, love pushing their feet faster than fear. Down the stairwell, through the emergency exit into the rain. They ran through Brooklyn's narrow streets, drenched and breathless, until they found refuge in an abandoned mechanic shop. There, in the cold darkness, Aurelio cupped Serafina's face. "You don't deserve this," he whispered. "This isn't your war." She shook her head. "It became my war the moment I loved you." He pulled her close, forehead pressed to hers. "Then I swear we'll survive it. Together." And they meant it with every breath. While Aurelio and Serafina ran through the rain, Vincenzo stood before a map of New York in his private office. Beside him were his generals, men who had fought beside him for decades. Vincenzo pointed at a set of warehouses on the Brooklyn docks. "Cassian is amassing weapons here. Tonight, we take them." One general hesitated. "Boss, if we make this strike, the city will explode." Vincenzo's voice was cold. "It already has." He stepped back, eyes hollow yet burning. "This ends with one of us alive." Midnight. The Lucchese convoy arrived at the Brooklyn docks under a fog thick enough to swallow sound. Vincenzo stepped out of the SUV, cane in one hand, gun in the other. His men fanned out behind him, silent, deadly, determined. Inside the warehouse, Cassian's men were unloading crates. Then someone whistled. "Lions here." Chaos erupted. Gunshots tore through the night. Flashes of light split the fog. Men ducked behind crates, metal beams, trucks. Vincenzo took cover behind a pillar and fired with precise, surgical accuracy. He yelled into his radio. "Push them back on the right." From the shadows, Cassian's lieutenant appeared with a rocket launcher. "Lucchese dies tonight." But before he could fire, a bullet, clean, sharp, pierced his shoulder. He dropped the launcher. Vincenzo turned. Aurelio was at the edge of the dock, soaked from rain, holding his gun with fierce resolve. "Aurelio." What are you doing here? Vincenzo shouted. Aurelio ran to his father's side. You go to war, I go to war. Vincenzo's chest tightened with fear, but also pride. Where's Serafina? Safe. Vincenzo nodded. Then, let's finish this. A black SUV screeched to a halt. Cassian stepped out like a shadow, wearing a man's shape, eyes blazing, coat billowing, anger radiating from his bones. His gaze met Vincenzo's through the chaos. For a moment, everything stopped. Rain fell slower. Gunshots muted. The world shrank to two men who once promised loyalty more sacred than blood. Vincenzo raised his gun. Cassian raised his. The past stood between them. Every childhood memory, every shared battle, every victory built side by side. Cassian whispered. You took everything from me. Vincenzo whispered. You betrayed everything we built. Then they fired. Both missed on purpose. Because killing each other too quickly would be merciful. Cassian spotted Aurelio across the battlefield. Something inside him snapped. You, he roared. Aurelio froze. Sir. Cassian pointed his gun. You stole my daughter. Aurelio dropped his weapon. No. I love your daughter. Cassian's face twisted with pain. Aurelio stepped forward. I didn't take her away from you, your war did. Cassian fired. Aurelio dove behind a crate, bullet grazing his arm. Stop. Serafina's voice cried. She had followed Aurelio. She stood in the open, rain plastering her hair to her face, tears mixing with storm water. Cassian turned. Serafina, what are you doing? She stepped between him and Aurelio. Choosing. And the world broke around them. Vincenzo saw Cassian aiming again. Not at Aurelio this time, but at Serafina. He didn't think. He didn't breathe. He ran. A gunshot cracked, and Vincenzo lunged between the bullet and the children, throwing himself across the concrete floor with the last burst of strength in his body. The bullet hit his spine. He collapsed. Aurelio screamed. Serafina screamed. Cassian froze in horror. Vincenzo lay on the ground, legs motionless, breath fading. He looked at Aurelio. At least, I saved you both. Then he turned to Cassian with one final whisper. And this is where the war ends. Cassian fell to his knees, dropping his gun, because in that moment, seeing Vincenzo bleed, seeing the children clinging together, seeing what his anger had caused, he realized he had destroyed the last piece of his old life, and the price was more than blood. It was his soul. Rain still fell on the battlefield, soft, cold, almost mournful, as if the sky itself was grieving for what had just happened. Vincenzo Lucchese lay on the concrete, unmoving from the waist down. Aurelio knelt beside him, hands trembling, eyes red with horror. Serafina clung to Aurelio, sobbing into his shoulder, and Cassian stood frozen in the center of the wreckage, his gun slipping from his hand, his soul collapsing inside him. This was the moment the fathers realized something brutal. No empire was worth the children's blood, and no throne was worth a daughter's tears, and no war was worth this cost. Father, stay with me. Please, stay with me. Aurelio cried, gripping Vincenzo's hand. Vincenzo's breath came in shallow, uneven waves. I'm here, my boy. I'm right here. Paramedics rushed in at last, sirens echoing through the wet docks. As they lifted Vincenzo, he grabbed Aurelio's wrist. His eyes, dark, powerful, full of love, met his son's one last time. Protect her, he whispered. His gaze flickered to Serafina. Both of you. Don't let our sins become your scars. Then he was taken away. Aurelio's world collapsed into silence. Serafina turned to her father. Her voice was shaking, fragile, but fierce. You shot him. Cassian stepped back, eyes wide. Serafina, I didn't mean. You were in the way. It wasn't supposed to. Her voice cracked like something shattering inside her. You tried to kill him, and you nearly killed me. Cassian's throat tightened. No, I would never. You don't understand. I do, she whispered. Better than you. Cassian looked at her, his daughter, his heart, his only light, and for the first time since this war began, he looked truly afraid, not afraid of Vincenzo, not of defeat, not of death, afraid of losing her. He reached out, hand trembling, but Serafina stepped back. Cassian dropped his arm slowly, as if the weight of it had suddenly become unbearable. Hours later, the Lucchese estate was silent as a tomb. Aurelio paced the hospital hallway, shirt stained with blood, his father's blood, each step echoing with guilt, grief, and the agony of wondering whether the only parent he had left would survive. Serafina stayed beside him, refusing to leave his side. When the doctor finally emerged, Aurelio froze. "Your father's alive," the doctor said. Aurelio closed his eyes in relief. But his legs, the doctor exhaled softly. The bullet severed his spinal cord. He will never walk again. Serafina covered her mouth, tears spilling. Aurelio broke. He slid down the wall, hands in his hair, breath shaking like a man drowning. Serafina knelt and wrapped her arms around him, holding him as tightly as he once held her. "It's not your fault," she whispered. "It's not your fault." But Aurelio's voice cracked. "He jumped in front of us. If we hadn't been standing there, if we hadn't." Serafina grabbed his face. "Listen to me. Your father made a choice out of love, a choice to end the war. Not because of us, but because of who he is." Aurelio pressed his forehead against hers. "He saved us." She nodded softly. "And we will save him." Back at the Vale Grande mansion, Cassian sat alone in his dark study. His right hand shook uncontrollably, from guilt, from fear, from the crushing reality that he had destroyed everything. Marco Vescari entered, strolling casually. "Well, that was a mess," he said with a smirk. Cassian didn't move. Marco continued. "So what's the plan? Retaliation? Another strike? We can still—" Cassian cut him off coldly. "There will be no more blood." Marco scoffed. "You think you can just end it? After all we've done?" Cassian stood. For the first time in weeks, Marco saw the Cassian he remembered, the one who commanded with a single look, the one whose silence could kill a man faster than a bullet. "You're no longer part of my future," Cassian said calmly. Marco reached for his gun. Cassian moved faster. .1 strike, .1 scream. .1 moment later. Marco Vescari lay bleeding on the glass floor, and Cassian stood over him, shaking but resolute. The war was over, but the consequences had only begun. The next morning, Cassian walked into the hospital. Aurelio stood in the waiting room, eyes swollen from sleeplessness. Serafina stood beside him. When Cassian entered, she stiffened. Aurelio reached for her hand and stepped in front of her. Cassian lifted his palms. "I'm not here to fight," he said quietly. He looked at Aurelio. "Is he alive?" Aurelio nodded stiffly. "Yes." Cassian exhaled, a sound full of regret and relief. "I need to speak with him," he said. Aurelio took a step forward. "How dare you?" Serafina placed a hand on his arm. "It's okay." Aurelio swallowed. "Not alone." Cassian nodded. "Not alone." They entered Vincenzo's room together. The man who once commanded New York's underworld now lay in a hospital bed, pale, weak, and forever changed. Cassian approached slowly. Vincenzo's eyes opened for a moment. They were filled with the fury of every wound, then exhaustion. Cassian knelt beside the bed. "I lost myself," he whispered. "I envied you, I hated you, and I nearly destroyed everything." Vincenzo stared at him. Then he whispered, "You lost your hand the moment you picked up that gun." Cassian looked up. "What?" Aurelio lifted a machete used for medical trauma cutting. Before Cassian could react, Aurelio swung. A scream tore through the hospital. Cassian collapsed, clutching the stump where his right hand once was. Vincenzo whispered, "For the lives you've taken, for the one you almost took, this is your price." Serafina cried out, "Papa!" Aurelio grabbed her. "He is to pay." Cassian gasped, voice broken. "I accept it for you. Serafina, for the peace, I accept it." And in that brutal, irreversible moment, the war ended. The fathers fell. The children rose. New York had never known silence. IT was a city built on noise. Engines, sirens, whispers, ambition. But after the war between Vincenzo Lucchese and Cassian Vale Grande ended, the city felt a strange, quiet settle over it. Not peace, not safety, but a quiet that follows destruction. The kind that comes when two kings fall and two heirs rise from the ashes. This was the final chapter. The healing, the reckoning, though. Beginning, Vincenzo Lucchese sat in a wheelchair by the window of his estate, sunlight warming the hands that once carried the empire. His legs lay still, pale, unmoving, gone forever. Aurelio wheeled him into the morning light. Vincenzo breathed in slowly, painfully. "Do you resent me?" Aurelio asked softly. Vincenzo turned to him, a weak smile forming. "For what?" "For saving us, for losing your legs because of me." Vincenzo reached for his son's hand. "I didn't lose them because of you," he whispered. "I lost them for you, for her, for the future you two deserve." Aurelio bowed his head, tears burning behind his eyes. Vincenzo lifted his chin gently. "My legs were the cost of ending a war. I paid it willingly." Cassian Grande sat in his mansion, silent, pale, his right arm bandaged in thick layers where his hand once was. He stared at the empty space beside him like it was a memory he could never escape. Serafina stepped inside his room. Cassian looked up slowly. "Does it still hurt?" she asked softly. His voice was low, hoarse, every heartbeat. She sat beside him, carefully avoiding the bandaged stump. "Papa," she whispered, eyes glistening, "I never wanted this for you." Cassian closed his eyes. "I know, but it is what I deserved." Serafina gripped his arm gently. "What you deserved," she said quietly, "was to let go of hate before it destroyed us." His lips trembled. "I destroyed myself, Sarah, not you, not Aurelio, me." It was the truest thing he'd said in years. 3 months later, in a private garden between the two estates, Vincenzo's wheelchair rolled across the grass while Cassian walked slowly beside him, his missing hand wrapped in leather, his steps uneven from pain. They didn't look like kings anymore. They looked like what they truly were, two old friends who had survived their own destruction. Aurelio and Serafina waited under the cherry trees, their hands entwined. Cassian stopped short when he saw them. Vincenzo nodded gently. "Go on," he murmured. Serafina stepped forward first. "Papa, Aurelio is my choice. My happiness, my future." Aurelio added softly, "I will honor her with every breath I have." The fathers exchanged a long, weighted look. Cassian exhaled deeply. "Then let the past die with us." Vincenzo nodded. "And let the children live." There, under the soft rustling of cherry blossoms, the two men extended their hands. Cassian extended his left hand. Vincenzo extended his. They shook, and a war that nearly destroyed the city ended with a gesture that healed more than wounds. 1 year later, in a grand cathedral overlooking the Hudson River, Aurelio Lucchese stood at the altar, hands steady, eyes locked on the doors behind him. Vincenzo sat in his wheelchair, a proud smile lighting his face. Cassian stood across from him, sleeves rolled to reveal the leather cover over his missing hand, eyes softer than anyone had seen in years. The doors opened. Serafina entered. She wore a flowing ivory gown, hair falling over her shoulders, eyes glowing with a love so fierce it softened the entire cathedral. Aurelio's breath caught. She walked toward him, toward freedom, toward a life neither of them had ever dared to dream. Cassian's eyes filled with tears. Not regret, not pain, but peace. They exchanged vows with voices trembling from emotion. "I love you beyond loyalty, beyond blood, beyond war. I choose you in peace and in fire, in darkness and in dawn." And when they sealed their vows with a kiss, the cathedral erupted into applause. Vincenzo wiped a tear from his cheek. Cassian rested his hand on his heart. The children of enemies were now husband and wife. The war had ended where love began. After the wedding, the Lucchese and Grande families rebuilt their lives. Vincenzo remained the mind behind the empire, ruling from his wheelchair with wisdom rather than strength. Cassian, humbled and changed, became the strategist who ensured the peace lasted. Aurelio and Serafina became the new bridge between two worlds, not rulers of fear, but leaders of a kinder legacy. The city watched them, respected them, feared them, loved them. They were the proof that even in the deepest darkness, love can build what war destroys. And so the empire lived on, no longer built on betrayal, but on the unbreakable bond of two hearts and the scars of two fathers who finally learned that love is stronger than vengeance.